The Luftwaffe pilots had no idea what was coming. As they approached the American bomber formations that crisp morning over Europe, they were confident in their superior tactics and agility. But what happened next would forever change the course of aerial warfare. Hundreds of synchronized 50-caliber machine guns, turning the sky into a lethal wall of lead that no German aircraft could penetrate. In the early days of World War II, the German Luftwaffe reigned supreme over European skies. Their pilots were the best trained in the world, veterans of the Spanish Civil War and the Blitzkrieg campaigns that had swept across Poland, the Low Countries, and France. They flew aircraft that were nimble, responsive, and deadly, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds and Focke-Wulf Fw 190 seconds that struck fear into Allied hearts. Among these elite pilots was Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann, a 27-year-old ace from Munich with over 40 confirmed kills. Tall and sharp-featured with piercing blue eyes, Hoffmann embodied the Luftwaffe's arrogance and skill. Having cut his teeth in the skies over Poland and France, he had developed a reputation for fearlessness and tactical brilliance. The Americans are amateurs. Hoffmann told his squadron mates over breakfast at their forward airbase near Frankfurt on the morning of the 14th of October 1943. They fly in these tight formations thinking they're invincible. Today we'll show them how wrong they are. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The target that day was the American bomber stream heading toward the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt, a critical component of the German war machine. Intelligence had reported nearly 300 B-17 flying fortresses were en route, arranged in their distinctive combat box formations that the Americans had developed. What Hoffmann and his comrades didn't fully appreciate was how these formations had evolved. Initially created as a defensive measure, the combat box positioned bombers in staggered layers and staggered columns, allowing the greatest number of defensive guns to bear on attacking fighters from any direction. Major General Curtis LeMay of the 8th Air Force had been studying the problem of bomber losses intently. After watching too many of his boys fail to return from missions over German territory, he had completely rethought the formation strategy. The result was a tighter, more integrated pattern where each bomber's defensive firepower complemented the others. A single B-17 carried 13 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns. Each gun could fire 850 rounds per minute, sending thumb-sized projectiles through the air at over 2,800 feet per second. Powerful enough to tear through armor plating and engine blocks, these weren't just defensive weapons, they were offensive deterrents. "They think their fighters can dance around us," LeMay had told his squadron commanders. "Let's show them what happens when they face not one bomber, but an integrated weapon system of dozens acting as one." The morning of October 14 dawned clear and cold over England. At air bases across East Anglia, ground crews worked through the night to ensure every B-17 was combat-ready. Special attention was paid to the gun systems, cleaning, loading, and testing each of the 13 50-caliber machine guns that bristled from the bombers like the quills of a porcupine. Captain James Miller, a 24-year-old pilot from Kansas City, Missouri, climbed into the cockpit of his B-17G, nicknamed Prairie Fire. This would be his 16th mission, but the tension never eased. His crew was a mix of veterans and replacements. The harsh reality of bomber operations over Germany meant constant rotation as men were killed, wounded, or reached their mission quota. "Today's going to be rough," Miller told his co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert Davis. "Schweinfurt is deep in enemy territory. The Luftwaffe will come out in force." Davis nodded grimly. At 22, he had already seen more death than most people witness in a lifetime. "The boys are ready." Gunners were up half the night practicing their coordination. That coordination was the key to the new strategy. No longer were gunners expected to operate independently. Through countless drills and training exercises, they had learned to work together across multiple aircraft, creating overlapping fields of fire that would turn their individual guns into a synchronized defense system. As the massive formation of B-17 seconds thundered eastward over the North Sea, German radar operators along the Dutch coast tracked their progress. Within minutes, The alert had reached Luftwaffe command centers throughout northern Germany. Hoffmann and his squadron of 12 Bf 109G fighters were scrambled immediately, joining dozens of other fighter groups converging on the incoming bomber stream. In all, nearly 300 German fighters were rising to meet the American threat. Remember, Hoffmann radioed to his pilots as they climbed through 20,000 feet, attack from the front. Their gunners can't track us well in a head-on pass. Break their formation and pick them off individually. It was a tactic that had worked well in the past. The Americans, still learning the brutal art of strategic bombing, had suffered catastrophic losses earlier in the year using looser formations. The Germans expected more of the same. What they couldn't see, as they climbed toward the bomber stream, was that this was no ordinary formation. The B-17 seconds flew in tight, disciplined boxes of 18 aircraft each, stacked in 3 levels. Multiple boxes formed combat wings, creating a massive aerial armada that stretched for miles across the sky. As Hoffmann led his squadron toward the lead elements of the formation, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was the moment of truth, the point of commitment, when a fighter pilot must suppress all fear and focus entirely on the attack. Achtung! Attack in pairs, 30-second intervals, he commanded. Gruppe 1, follow me in. The Messerschmitts rolled into their attack dives, picking up speed as they hurtled toward the lead combat box. Hoffmann targeted the lead bomber, intending to decapitate the formation's leadership with the first pass. What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. As the German fighters approached within a kilometer of the bomber formation, the sky erupted, not with the expected sporadic defensive fire, but with a coordinated wall of tracer rounds that seemed to fill every cubic meter of space between them and their targets. The Americans had transformed their bombers into a single, integrated weapons platform. Through intensive training, gunners had learned to coordinate their fire, creating overlapping fields of defensive coverage that left no safe approach angle for the attacking fighters. A single combat box of 1/8 B-17 seconds carried 234 heavy machine guns. The entire formation of nearly 300 bombers brought over 3,900 guns to bear. Not all could target a given attack axis, but even a fraction of this firepower was unprecedented in aerial warfare. The first wave of German fighters flew straight into this lethal storm. Hoffmann watched in horror as 3 of his squadron mates were hit simultaneously, their fighters erupting into fireballs or spinning away, trailing smoke and debris. "Break off! Break off!" he screamed into his radio, yanking his Messerschmitt into a desperate, evasive maneuver. A line of tracer fire followed him, the distinctive red streaks of American .50 caliber ammunition seeming to reach for his aircraft like the fingers of death itself. Across the sky, the same scene was playing out as German fighter pilots encountered something they had never faced before, a truly integrated defensive system that multiplied the effectiveness of each individual bomber. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt, leading another squadron of Focke-Wulf Fw 190 fighters, attempted an attack from below, traditionally one of the weaker points in bomber defense. As his fighters climbed toward the bombers' bellies, they were met with coordinated fire from multiple ball turrets and waist gunners. "It's like flying into a wall," Schmidt radioed frantically. "They're tracking us from multiple bombers?" Indeed, the American gunners had developed a new system of cross-formation coverage. Ball turret gunners from adjacent bombers coordinated their fields of fire, while waist gunners covered the gaps. The result was a lethal web that gave attacking fighters no safe avenue of approach. Inside prairie fire, Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez manned the ball turret, the claustrophobic bubble protruding from the B-17's belly. Suspended in a fetal position with his feet on the gun controls and his body surrounded by ammunition belts, Rodriguez had the best view of the attacking fighters from below. "Bandits at 6 low," he called into his intercom, multiple 190 seconds climbing. "I see them," responded Technical Sergeant William Jackson from the left waist gun position. "Diamonds 3 and 4 have them covered. Hold fire until they reach pattern edge." This disciplined approach to ammunition conservation was another element of the new American strategy. Rather than each gunner firing wildly at distant targets, they coordinated to engage enemy fighters only when they entered optimal range for multiple gun positions. The result was devastating. As Schmidt's Focke-Wulfs entered the designated engagement zone, they were met with simultaneous fire from not just one B-17, but from carefully coordinated guns across multiple aircraft. 3 fighters were hit in the first volley, one disintegrating immediately while the others peeled away trailing smoke. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the eastern edge of the formation, another German tactic was being attempted. Recognizing the deadly effectiveness of the frontal defense, Hauptmann Kurt Wagner led his squadron in a high-speed pass from the rear, hoping to exploit the defensive blind spots behind the bomber's horizontal stabilizers. What Wagner didn't know was that the Americans had anticipated this. The rear combat boxes had been specifically configured to counter this approach, with their own rear-facing guns coordinated to provide overlapping fields of fire that protected the trailing bombers. As Wagner's fighters dove from 28,000 feet toward the rear elements of the bomber stream, they were tracked by dozens of tail gunners who had been warned of their approach by radio from observation aircraft flying at the edges of the formation. "Bandits! High, 6, diving," came the call across the formation's radio net. "Boxes Charlie and Dog, prepare for rear attack." The tail gunners of 16 B-17 seconds swiveled their twin, 50 caliber guns upward, tracking the incoming fighters. On command, they opened fire simultaneously, creating a curtain of lead that filled the sky directly in the path of Wagner's squadron. Wagner himself was among the first casualties, his Bf 109 taking multiple hits that shattered his canopy and severed his right arm. His fighter rolled inverted and plummeted earthward, the mortally wounded pilot unable to control the aircraft or bail out. 5 more of his 12 fighters were damaged or destroyed in that single coordinated volley. The survivors broke off their attack, shocked by the unexpected intensity of the defensive fire. Back in the lead elements, Hoffmann had regrouped with his surviving pilots. 7 of his original 12 fighters remained, and they circled at a safe distance, looking for any weakness in the bomber formation's defense. "We need to coordinate with the other squadrons," Hoffmann radioed to Luftwaffe Command. "Individual attacks are suicide against this formation." The response came back quickly. "Negative. Continue attacks. Reinforcements en route from JG-26 and JG-3. Hoffmann knew what this meant. The German High Command didn't yet understand what they were facing. They still believed that enough fighters could overwhelm the bomber defenses through sheer numbers and aggression. "We need a new tactic," he told his remaining pilots. "We'll approach from multiple directions simultaneously, split into pairs and attack from different vectors on my signal." It was a desperate gambit, but the only one he could think of that might split the Americans' defensive attention. As the reinforcements arrived, fresh squadrons of Bf 109 seconds and Fw of W 190 seconds, Hoffmann briefed them quickly on what they were facing. "These aren't the same Americans we fought 6 months ago," he warned. "Their gunners are coordinated across multiple bombers. No single approach vector is safe." The new German formation spread out, forming a rough circle around the lead combat boxes of the bomber stream. On Hoffmann's signal, they attacked simultaneously from 12 different directions, hoping to overwhelm the defensive coordination. Inside the American formation, radar operators and observers called out the new threat pattern. Colonel Robert Thompson, commanding the lead combat wing from his B-17 Detroit Iron, recognized the German strategy immediately. "They're trying to split our focus," he radioed to his box commanders. "Maintain discipline. Sector Defense Protocol Alpha." This was another innovation the Americans had developed. Rather than having every gun position respond to every threat, the formation was divided into defensive sectors. Gunners were assigned specific zones to cover, ensuring that even a multi-vector attack would face coordinated response. As the German fighters dove toward the formation from all sides, they encountered the same lethal wall of coordinated fire. The Americans had trained for exactly this scenario, and their response was disciplined and devastating. Hoffmann watched in dismay as fighter after fighter was hit. Even approaching from multiple angles simultaneously, the Germans couldn't overwhelm the American defensive coordination. Each attack vector faced dozens of synchronized guns pouring fire into carefully defended approach corridors. The skies around the bomber stream became a graveyard of German fighters. Burning aircraft fell away in spiraling dives. Parachutes bloomed like white flowers against the blue sky as pilots abandoned their stricken machines. After 15 minutes of continuous attacks, the Luftwaffe had lost over 60 fighters while downing only 7 B-17 seconds. It was a devastating exchange ratio that the Germans could not sustain. Hoffmann, his own fighter now damaged with a malfunctioning engine and holes in his right wing, made the difficult decision. "Break off engagement," he radioed to all German fighters. "Return to base. I repeat, break off engagement." As the surviving German fighters turned away, the American bomber stream continued relentlessly toward its target. Inside Prairie Fire, Captain Miller allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. "Looks like they've had enough," he commented to his co-pilot. "For now," Davis replied. "We still have to drop our bombs and get back home. Long way to go yet." Miller nodded, knowing his co-pilot was right. The battle was far from over. But something fundamental had changed in the skies over Europe. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Luftwaffe had just received a shocking lesson in the evolving nature of aerial warfare. Back at his base near Frankfurt, a dejected and wounded Hoffmann made his report to Luftwaffe High Command. "The Americans have transformed their defense," he explained. "They're no longer individual bombers, they're a single integrated weapons system with overlapping fields of fire. Our current tactics are obsolete." The Schweinfurt raid would mark a turning point in the air war over Europe. As the B-17 formation approached their target, the Luftwaffe made one final desperate attempt to break through their defenses. This time, the Germans tried a new tactic: mass concentration against a single combat box. Oberstleutnant Hans Dieter, commander of Jagdgeschwader 11, had listened to Hoffmann's report with growing concern. A decorated veteran with over 100 kills on the Eastern Front, Dieter was not a man who accepted defeat easily. "If we cannot defeat their entire formation, we will isolate and destroy a portion of it," he declared to the assembled fighter pilots. "Concentrate all available aircraft against their trailing combat box, overwhelm them with sheer numbers." Nearly 70 fighters, a mix of Bf 109 seconds and Fw 190 seconds, were scrambled for this final effort. As the bomber formation began their approach to Schweinfurt, the German fighters gathered high above and behind them, preparing for a coordinated strike against the rearmost box of 18 B-17 seconds. Inside Lucky Lady, the lead bomber of the trailing box, Major Frank Harrison checked his watch anxiously. They were still 20 minutes from the target, deep in hostile territory. The initial fighter attacks had been repelled, but everyone knew the Germans would return. "Keep sharp, boys," he called over the intercom to his crew. "They'll be back, and they'll have learned from their mistakes." Harrison couldn't know how right he was. Even as he spoke, the massive German formation was beginning its attack run, all 70 fighters converging on his combat box of 18 bombers. Colonel Thompson, commanding the lead combat wing, received the warning from a reconnaissance P-47 flying high cover. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high, at least 5 dozen. They're concentrating on Tail Group Charlie." Thompson immediately recognized the German strategy. "All available fighter escort, reinforce Tail Group Charlie," he ordered. "Boxes Abel and Baker, increase rear defensive coverage." But the P-51 Mustang escorts were engaged with other Luftwaffe units and couldn't immediately disengage. Tail Group Charlie would have to face the brunt of the German attack alone. What followed was one of the most intense aerial battles of the entire European campaign. The German fighters attacked in 3 waves of roughly 20 aircraft each, coming from multiple vectors, but all focusing on the same 18 B-17 seconds. The bombers tightened their formation, bringing their defensive firepower to maximum effectiveness. 700 synchronized, 50 caliber machine guns roared in defense, filling the sky with a lethal web of tracer fire. The first wave of German fighters suffered heavily, losing 11 aircraft in their initial pass while damaging 5 B-17 seconds. But the second and third waves pressed home their attacks with fanatical determination, willing to accept losses to break the American formation. "They're going after our high element," Harrison observed grimly as 3 B-17 seconds on the upper level of their box came under concentrated attack. Charlie 6, 7, and 8, hang tough. Inside Desert Rat, one of the targeted B-17 seconds, Technical Sergeant Paul Martinez manned the top turret, his twin, 50 calibers, hammering continuously as fighters swarmed around them. Shell casings piled around his feet as he expended belt after belt of ammunition. "I'm counting 9. No, 10 fighters on this pass alone," he reported to his pilot, Lieutenant David Cohen. "They're really gunning for us specifically." Cohen fought to keep his bomber in perfect formation despite a damaged aileron and smoke trailing from their No. 3 engine. "Stay in formation at all costs," he reminded his crew. "Our best defense is staying tight with the others." This was the hard lesson the Americans had learned through bitter experience. A bomber that strayed from formation, even slightly, became exponentially more vulnerable to fighter attacks. The entire defensive concept relied on mutual support and overlapping fields of fire. As the battle raged, the inherent strength of the combat box formation revealed itself. Despite the concentrated attack by vastly superior numbers of fighters, the formation held together. Bombers supported each other with interlocking fields of fire that made every attack run a gauntlet of coordinated defensive fire. In the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190, Hauptmann Felix Kramer made his third attack run against the American formation. His fighter was already damaged, with bullet holes in his left wing and oil streaking his canopy from a punctured line. "I can't get close enough for a killing shot," he radioed to his wingman. "Their fire is too coordinated. Every approach vector is covered by multiple guns." Indeed, the B-17 gunners had been trained to create a three-dimensional defensive bubble around their formation. Top turrets, ball turrets, waist guns, and tail guns worked in concert not just within each bomber but across adjacent aircraft. The result was a defensive system greater than the sum of its parts. On the ground below, civilians and Wehrmacht personnel alike stopped to watch the epic battle unfolding in the skies above. The contrails of fighters and bombers etched white lines across the blue October sky, while puffs of flak from German anti-aircraft batteries added black punctuation marks to this aerial ballet of death. After 15 minutes of continuous attack, the German formation had been reduced by nearly half. 32 fighters had been shot down or forced to disengage with critical damage, while the American box had lost 4 bombers with 3 more heavily damaged but still flying. Dieter, observing from his command Bf 109, made the difficult decision to break off the attack. "All fighters withdraw and regroup," he ordered. "We cannot break their formation with current tactics." As the surviving German fighters pulled away, the American bomber formation continued toward their target. Despite the ferocity of the attack, the combat box concept had proven its worth. The coordinated defensive firepower of multiple B-17 seconds working in concert had created a virtually impenetrable shield against conventional fighter tactics. Inside Lucky Lady, Major Harrison surveyed the damage to his combat box. 4 bombers lost, 3 damaged but still flying, and 11 intact. Despite everything the Luftwaffe had thrown at them, the majority of his force remained combat effective. "Status report," he called over the formation radio net. "Charlie 3, still with you. Number 2, engine out. Minor damage to vertical stabilizer. Charlie 5, operational. Low on ammo but all systems functional. Charlie 8, heavy damage but maintaining position. Lost our ball turret and bombardier wounded." One by one, the surviving bombers reported in. They had weathered the worst the Luftwaffe could throw at them, and now their target lay just minutes ahead. Back at Luftwaffe headquarters, the reports coming in painted a disturbing picture for General Adolf Galland, commander of all German fighter forces. The Americans had fundamentally changed the equation of air combat with their integrated defensive formations. "We must develop new tactics immediately," Galland told his staff. "The Americans have transformed their bombers from individual targets into a unified weapons platform. Our current approach is no longer viable." Indeed, The statistics told a grim story. In that single mission to Schweinfurt, the Luftwaffe had lost 104 fighters while shooting down just 26 American bombers, an exchange rate that was strategically unsustainable for Germany. As the B-17 seconds approached their target, the box bombardiers prepared for their bomb runs. Despite the chaos and battle damage, the formation maintained the precise position necessary for accurate bombing. Captain Miller in Prairie Fire watched as the lead bombardiers in his combat box took control of their aircraft. This was the most vulnerable moment for the formation. They had to fly straight and level for the bombardiers to accurately aim their weapons. "Bomb bay doors open," Miller ordered, flipping the switch that hydraulically opened the massive doors on the B-17's belly, exposing the 8,000 pounds of high explosives carried inside. Across the formation, bomb bay doors opened in sequence, a choreographed movement that reflected the intense coordination that characterized every aspect of the American bombing campaign. "Bombs away," came the call from the lead aircraft, and within seconds, hundreds of 500-pound bombs fell from the formation, beginning their deadly descent toward the ball-bearing factories below. Miller felt Prairie Fire leap upward as the heavy bomb load was released. "Bomb bay doors closed," he ordered, already beginning the turn that would take them away from the target area and back toward England. The bombing run had been a success. Nearly 700 tons of high explosives fell on the Schweinfurt factories, destroying critical production facilities and setting back German war production by months. But the real victory had been won in the skies above Germany. The combat box formation, with its synchronized defensive firepower, had demonstrated its effectiveness against the vaunted Luftwaffe. The hunters had truly become the hunted. As the bomber formation turned westward for the long journey home, the mood among the crews was one of grim satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. They had faced the best the Luftwaffe could throw at them and prevailed. Inside Prairie Fire, the crew took stock of their situation. They had expended over 7,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, more than half their total load. 2 crewmen had suffered minor wounds from shrapnel, and the aircraft itself bore the scars of numerous near misses. "Good work today, boys," Miller told his crew over the intercom. "We showed Jerry what happens when he takes on a coordinated defense." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, emerging from his ball turret after hours in cramped position, stretched his aching limbs. "Those new tactics made all the difference, Captain. They couldn't find a way through our fields of fire." Indeed, the evolution of bomber defensive tactics had transformed the strategic situation over Europe. What had once been a deadly gauntlet for American bombers was becoming an equally deadly trap for German fighters. Back at their base in Frankfurt, Hoffmann debriefed his surviving pilots. Of the 12 who had taken off that morning, only 5 had returned. The others were either dead or captured, their aircraft falling victim to the coordinated defensive fire of the American bombers. "We must adapt," Hoffmann told them bluntly. "The Americans have changed the rules of engagement. We can no longer rely on individual pilot skill and aggression to overcome their defenses." In the weeks that followed, the Luftwaffe would develop new tactics designed to counter the combat box formation. They would attempt high-speed slashing attacks from extreme ranges, using heavier cannons to stay outside the effective range of the .50 caliber machine guns. They would deploy rocket launchers and even air-to-air bombs, desperate measures to break the defensive integrity of the American formations. But none of these would prove fully effective. The fundamental calculus of aerial warfare over Europe had changed, and the advantage had shifted decisively to the defenders. In England, as the bomber crews recovered from their mission, the strategic implications were not lost on the commanders of the 8th Air Force. General LeMay reviewed the after-action reports with satisfaction. "The combat box concept has proven itself," he told his staff. "We've transformed our individual bombers into a unified weapons system that multiplies our defensive capability exponentially." The statistics supported his assessment. Prior to the implementation of the integrated defensive tactics, bomber losses had sometimes exceeded 25% on deep penetration missions. With the new formation strategies and coordinated gunnery, those losses had been reduced to under 10%, despite increasingly desperate German countermeasures. For the individual aircrews, This translated directly into increased survival chances. Before the combat box tactics were refined, a bomber crew could expect to survive about 15 missions on average before being shot down. With the new approach, that number more than doubled. Captain Miller and his crew would go on to complete their full tour of 25 missions, a feat that would have been nearly impossible just months earlier. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would be credited with 4 confirmed fighter kills from his ball turret position, a testament to the effectiveness of the coordinated defensive fire. As for Oberleutnant Hoffmann, he would survive the war, though not without further losses. The October 14 mission had opened his eyes to the changing nature of air combat, and he became an advocate for new fighter tactics that acknowledged the reality of the American defensive formations. "We must respect their innovation," he wrote in a tactical assessment for Luftwaffe Command. "The Americans have transformed individual vulnerability into collective strength through coordination and discipline." The lesson was not lost on military strategists around the world. The combat box formation and its synchronized defensive firepower demonstrated a fundamental principle of modern warfare. The whole could be far greater than the sum of its parts when properly organized and coordinated. In the decades after the war, this concept would influence military doctrine across multiple domains. The principle that integrated systems could multiply effectiveness beyond the capabilities of individual platforms would drive developments in everything from naval task forces to modern networked warfare. For the young men who flew in those combat box formations, facing the elite of the Luftwaffe day after day, the experience would mark them for life. They had faced death together, survived through mutual support and coordination, and in doing so, helped turn the tide of the air war over Europe. On a sunny day in 1985, at a reunion of 8th Air Force veterans in Dayton, Ohio, an elderly James Miller, now with silver hair and reading glasses, shared a drink with a man he had once tried to kill, Karl Hoffmann, the former Luftwaffe ace. "We never understood at first why you Americans flew in such tight formations," Hoffmann admitted. "It seemed to make you more vulnerable, more predictable." Miller nodded. "That was the genius of it. What looked like a weakness was actually our greatest strength. By staying together, we multiplied our defensive power exponentially." 700 synchronized guns, Hoffmann mused, shaking his head at the memory. It was like flying into a wall of lead. The two old warriors, once mortal enemies, raised their glasses in mutual respect. They had both been participants in one of the great tactical innovations of aerial warfare, a moment when American ingenuity and coordination had transformed the humble defensive machine guns of individual bombers into an integrated weapons system that helped win control of the skies over Europe. As they looked back across the decades, both men understood that they had witnessed a pivotal moment in military history when the Luftwaffe pilots attacked combat box formations and faced 700 synchronized, 50-caliber guns. It was a lesson written in blood and fire across the skies of Europe, a testament to the power of coordination and the indomitable spirit of the young men who fought and died in the greatest aerial conflict the world had ever seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.